What happens when a neighborhood security guard pulls a loaded gun on a woman who's taken down terrorists in nearly 20 countries? The answer: pure, instant regret. "Get out of our neighborhood or I'll shoot," the man barked, his hand trembling as he leveled the weapon at my daughter's face. He wore a badge, but she carried something far more dangerous: 12 years of Delta Force training that had kept her alive in the deadliest corners of the world. This story will infuriate you, but it may also make you laugh as you see how the self-appointed Queen of HOA and her loyal enforcers accidentally woke up a sleeping giant. Moving into Elmwood Estates had seemed like the perfect decision at the time. After 15 years in the military and another 15 as a civil engineer, I just wanted peace and quiet. My name's Jack Miller, and at 53, I thought I understood what I was signing when I closed on my new home. The real estate agent conveniently skipped over one important detail. The manicured, picture-perfect neighborhood was ruled by one of the most truthless homeowners associations in the state. My daughter Emily had come to stay with me for a while under the pretense of recovering from a knee injury. What I didn't realize then was that the injury was only a cover for something much bigger. I was barely done unpacking boxes when I got my first violation. The envelope was crisp white, gold lettering on the front: Elmwood Estates, where excellence lives. Inside, a notice claimed my trash bin was 1 inch too far from the curb. That little mistake came with a $50 fine. I laughed, thinking a neighbor was pulling a prank. It wasn't. The next day brought another citation, and my grass was 1/4 inch too tall. Another $50. The day after that, they objected to my curtains not matching the approved community palette. That's when I decided it was time to meet the people behind these absurd rules. The HOA's monthly meeting was held in the community center, a building that looked more like a mini palace than a place for neighbors to gather. As soon as I walked in, the chatter died down and every head turned. That's when I saw here Patricia Sullivan, the president, sitting like a queen at the head of a long table. Perfect hair, permanent scowl, and the unmistakable air of someone who believed she owned every person in the room. Later I would learn she was a twice-divorced former middle manager, fired for being impossible to work with. The HOA had become her personal kingdom, the only place she could rule. "Mr. Miller, how nice of you to join us," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We were just reviewing the new landscaping regulations. Perhaps you'd like to pay extra attention, considering your struggles with lawn maintenance." Laughter rippled across the room. I kept calm, introduced myself, and took a seat. For the next hour I watched her and her board of people, clearly too scared to oppose here, vote on one suffocating rule after another. The last straw came when they banned parking cars in driveways for more than 2 hours. My house, unlike most in the neighborhood, didn't have a garage. The rule was aimed squarely at me. When the floor opened for questions, I stood. "I'd like to ask about the financial reports. HOA dues are substantial. Can you share exactly how they're being spent?" Her smile disappeared instantly. "Our finances are perfectly in order, Mr. Miller. If you don't like our regulations, you're welcome to sell your house and leave." Around me, no one made eye contact. My neighbors kept their eyes fixed on the table, too afraid to back me up. I clenched my fist in my pocket but kept my composure, the calm of a soldier who's seen worse. "Thank you for the enlightening meeting," I said evenly. "I'll remember it." As I walked out, I knew this wasn't something I could ignore. She wanted a fight. She'd get one. But I didn't realize the real battle would begin only when a true warrior arrived in Elmwood Estates. On my way home, I met Charles Winters, a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran 3 doors down. His hands trembled as he told me how the HOA had forced him to remove a small flagpole honoring his fallen comrades. $500 a day in fines until I tore it down, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder like a hunted man. "Been here 15 years, and now I can barely afford to stay." My blood boiled as he explained how Patricia had personally supervised its removal, smirking while Charles fought back tears. Over the next few days, more neighbors quietly approached me. Margaret Reynolds, a widow in her 60s, had been ordered to rip out the rose garden her late husband planted. The Rodriguez family had been fined $2,000 for allowing relatives to stay overnight at Christmas without prior approval. This wasn't just rule enforcement, it was a system of intimidation, designed to squeeze money out of people or drive them to sell cheap. I started documenting everything, using my engineering background to keep detailed records. More than once, I caught Ryan, the head of their so-called security team, snapping photos of my house at odd hours. When I confronted him, he smirked and said they were just monitoring compliance. His confidence made it clear. They thought they were untouchable. I needed backup, but I had no idea that help was already under my roof. Authorities didn't want to get involved, brushing off HOA conflicts as civil matters. City officials, too, stopped returning my calls the moment I mentioned Elmwood Estates. 3 weeks after that disastrous home meeting, my daughter Emily returned home. Everyone in our family believed she worked an overseas consulting job. The truth was far more complicated. Emily had served 12 years in the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force, a fact known only to a handful of people. At just 32, she'd seen more combat than most soldiers twice her age. Her official discharge reason was a minor knee injury, but I always suspected something deeper lay behind it. She never liked to talk about her service, and I respected that. What I didn't expect was how quickly she would sense the tension in our new neighborhood. "Dad, what's with all these violation letters?" she asked one morning, holding a thick stack of envelopes stamped with the HOA logo. I tried to laugh it off while making breakfast, explaining the petty fines. Emily just listened, her face unreadable, her soldiers calm, making it impossible to know what she was thinking. "Don't worry about it," I said finally. "It's just neighborhood politics." She nodded, but I could see in her eyes she didn't believe me. That was Emily, always watching, always assessing. The very next day, she got involved. While out walking as part of her knee therapy, she spotted 3 men cornering an elderly neighbor. Their matching polo shirts bore the words Elmwood Estates Security. The man they were harassing was Walter Thompson, a 65-year-old retired teacher. His crime? A fence that didn't fit the HOA's exact measurements. Walter couldn't afford to rebuild it, and daily fines were draining his modest pension. Leading the pack was Ryan Briggs, the so-called head of security. In reality, he was a former grocery store guard fired for using excessive force. Patricia had hired him to play tough guy for the association. Emily didn't rush, she didn't hesitate, she simply walked toward them with the calm, deliberate stride of someone who had walked into firefights across the globe and survived. "What are you doing with him?" she asked evenly, her voice calm, steady. "None of your business," Ryan snapped, though his voice betrayed a crack of unease. Emily held his stare without blinking, the silence pressed down like a weight. Ryan knew, even if he couldn't explain why, that he was standing in front of someone dangerous, someone who didn't need to raise her voice or wave her arms to dominate the situation. "You are going to let Mr. Thompson go home," Emily said slowly, "right now." Ryan opened his mouth to argue, but when she took one single step forward, he instinctively stepped back. No threats, no theatrics, just her presence. Like a predator that didn't need to roar. "Let's go," Ryan muttered, signaling to his men. "We'll handle this later." They retreated, and Walter, shaken but grateful, poured out his story. Emily walked him home, then came back with more determination than I'd ever seen. By nightfall, she had already uncovered enough about Patricia's tactics to confirm my suspicions. This wasn't about rules. It was a racket. Patricia Sullivan had built an entire money-making machine: arbitrary fines, inflated contracts handed to her relatives' companies, and intimidation campaigns to silence anyone who resisted. The next day Patricia herself showed up at my door. Her usual plastic smile was gone. "Mr. Miller," she snapped, "you need to control your daughter. She's interfering with HOA business and harassing my staff." I calmly explained that Emily had simply helped an elderly neighbor being bullied. Patricia didn't care. "There will be consequences if this continues," she warned, before storming off. That night, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, spreading out documents and testimonies collected from sympathetic neighbors. "Dad, this isn't just petty bureaucracy," she said firmly. "They're embezzling funds. Look at contracts awarded to Patricia's brother's maintenance company at triple the market price. And the intimidation? That's how they keep everyone in line." What we didn't realize was that Patricia had gone a step further. She had secretly installed unauthorized surveillance cameras throughout the neighborhood. The following week, as we quietly met with residents in Walter's living room, gathering more evidence, Patricia was watching. "I want the Miller family to understand what happens when people defy me," she told Ryan as they reviewed the footage. "When I left town on a short business trip, I had no idea Patricia was already planning her boldest move yet. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything and become her greatest mistake. Normally, I never worried about Emily being on her own. She had survived firefights and covert missions in places where most soldiers wouldn't last a day. Still, Patricia's last threat lingered in my mind as I packed. 'You sure you'll be alright?' I asked. Emily gave me the same calm smile she'd worn since childhood, and the one that always reassured me. 'Dad, I've dealt with insurgents in Kandahar. I can handle a power-hungry HOA president and her wannabe mall cops.' I laughed, but unease gnawed at me as I drove off. That night, Emily sat at the kitchen table reviewing job applications. She was considering opening a self-defense training center. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, aggressive knock at the door. Through the peephole, she spotted Ryan Briggs and two of his security goons. Their HOA polos stretched across angry shoulders. Ryan's face was flushed, maybe from alcohol, maybe from rage. "Open up, HOA inspection," he barked. Emily cracked the door but blocked their entry. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked evenly. Ryan shoved a piece of paper at her. "We've had reports of an unauthorized resident. All occupants must be registered. You're not on the list." Emily scanned the document. The regulation looked freshly printed, clearly fabricated. "I'm Mr. Miller's daughter. I'm staying temporarily while recovering from an injury. There's nothing in the HOA agreement requiring family visits to be registered." Ryan's face darkened. "New emergency regulation. We need to inspect the property and confirm your identity. You're not coming in without a warrant," Emily replied firmly. "This is private property." Quietly, she slid her phone halfway from her pocket. Already recording, Ryan shoved at the door, but Emily didn't budge. Her stance was steady, balanced, a posture forged by years of combat. "Get out of the way," Ryan shouted. "We have the authority to enter any home in Elmwood Estates." Emily's voice stayed calm. "That's Aaliyah and you know it. HOA rules don't override constitutional rights. I suggest you leave." Then Ryan made the mistake of his life. Furious and humiliated, he yanked a handgun from beneath his shirt. "Get out of our neighborhood or I'll shoot." But the gun had barely cleared his waistband when Emily moved. Her body shifted like a blade slicing air. A flash of motion, too quick to follow, and suddenly Ryan was face down on the porch, his arm twisted painfully behind his back. The weapon rested in Emily's hand, pinned to the wood. Ryan trembled. She could feel his panicked pulse thundering through his wrist, his breath ragged, his body soaked with fear. "Never point a gun at someone," Emily said softly, "unless you're ready for what comes next." The two other guards, Scott and Damon, didn't wait to see more. They bolted, leaving their leader in disgrace. Emily kept Ryan immobilized with one hand while calmly calling the police with the other. When officers arrived, they discovered the gun was unregistered and Ryan had an outstanding warrant for assault from a previous job. He was led away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, I was miles away, blissfully unaware, assuming Emily was enjoying a quiet night. When I returned the next day, I found her sipping tea on the porch as if nothing had happened. "How was your trip?" she asked casually. It wasn't until several minutes later that she mentioned, almost offhand, "Oh, by the way, one of the HOA security guys pulled a gun on me. He's in jail now." I nearly spilled my coffee. Part of me burned with anger, but another part of the soldier in me swelled with pride. My daughter had handled it with the composure and precision of a true professional. But then Emily's expression hardened. "This isn't over, Dad. Patricia has friends in law enforcement. Ryan's arrest will vanish from the records. They'll come after us harder now." She was right. We didn't yet realize just how deep Patricia's connections went or how far she was willing to go for revenge. The gun incident wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a systematic campaign to break us. And they had chosen the wrong family to target. The retaliation began almost immediately. Just days after Ryan's arrest, new violation notices started flooding in. Soon after Ryan's arrest, Patricia escalated her war against us. Flyers began appearing on neighbors' doors, warning about the dangerous new residents on Maple Drive. The pamphlets painted us as violent, unstable, and a threat to community safety. Overnight, Patricia had launched a character assassination campaign. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street to avoid us. Invitations to block parties and community gatherings were quietly withdrawn. Even the barista at the local coffee shop who had chatted with me warmly just a week before suddenly avoided eye contact when I came in for my morning coffee. The legal harassment grew worse. Our HOA fees suddenly tripled, along with a special security assessment supposedly required because of recent violent incidents. When I tried to challenge this at the next HOA meeting, I was informed that I was officially banned from attending and labeled a safety concern. Patricia's influence stretched further than we realized. Her cousin, Officer Steve Williams, made sure Ryan's arrest record vanished into thin air. The charges were reduced to a meaningless citation for disturbing the peace. The unregistered gun he'd aimed at my daughter was conveniently erased from the police report. But the worst blow came a week later. Sitting in my car outside the house, I stared at an email glowing on my phone screen. Termination notice. My company had decided to end my employment. The setting sun bled through the windshield, streaking my weathered face in red light. I twisted my old silver wedding band, a reminder of my late wife, and clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My daughter was being smeared, my job gone, and the house I'd bought with such hope had become a battlefield. They think they've taken everything, I muttered, but they've forgotten one thing: a broken bar. I've got nothing left to lose. The official reason for my firing: community disturbances affecting company reputation. Later, I discovered Patricia's brother Greg golfed regularly with my company's executive vice president. This wasn't neighborhood politics anymore. This was a coordinated takedown of our lives. That night, Emily found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and mortgage statements. "They're trying to force us out, Dad," she said, sitting across from me. "They want us to sell and disappear." "I know," I admitted grimly, "and they might succeed." For the first time since she came home, Emily's composure cracked, but only for a moment. Her eyes hardened. "No," she said, "that's not happening. We're done playing defense. It's time to fight back." That was the turning point. Emily reached out to James Cooper, an old Delta teammate now working as an investigative journalist. Together, they started digging into Patricia's finances and network. What they uncovered was far bigger than we had ever imagined. Patricia wasn't just terrorizing Elmwood Estates. She was running the same racket in 5 other communities across the state. Using fear, fake fines, and powerful friends, she funneled money into a network of shell companies controlled by her family. Meanwhile, I reached out to an old Army buddy who now worked for the IRS. Without revealing my personal stake, I asked him about HOA financial reporting requirements and the consequences for creative accounting. His answers were broken bar illuminating. A few days later, Walter Thompson knocked on our door after dark. His hands shook as he glanced up and down the street before stepping inside. "I'm not the only one," he whispered. "There are so many others who've been victims of Patricia's scams. They're afraid to speak." Boot to broken bar. He placed a thick folder on our table. My late wife was an accountant. She kept copies of HOA documents because she suspected something was wrong. These go back 5 years. Inside that folder was dynamite. The records showed Patricia had been skimming nearly 30% off the top of every HOA fee. The landscaping company supposedly owned by her cousin, actually registered in Patricia's own name. The community's emergency fund, over $300,000 of residents' money had been poured into her brother's failing real estate projects. And the biggest revelation, special assessments supposedly earmarked for infrastructure improvements had paid not for repairs, but for Patricia's luxury vacation home in Florida. Emily studied each page with the same methodical focus she had once applied to military intelligence reports. "This isn't just fraud, Dad," she said, pointing at the evidence. A broken bar. Emily's sharp eyes scanned the files. "Dad, this isn't just fraud," she said, pointing to a cluster of suspicious entries. "This is money laundering. Patricia's been using the HOA to funnel and clean cash from other illegal ventures." Walter leaned forward and lowered his voice. "There've been rumors about her brother," he admitted. "Word is, he's tangled up in shady land rezoning deals with crooked city officials." The more we uncovered, the clearer it became. Elmwood Estates wasn't the whole scheme. It was just one piece of a sprawling criminal empire. We decided to move cautiously, starting with Margaret Reynolds, whose rose garden Patricia had deliberately destroyed. To avoid suspicion, we met her at a diner 20 minutes from the neighborhood. Margaret didn't come alone. She brought 3 other homeowners, all elderly, all victims of Patricia's predatory fines. Their stories were eerily consistent. When residents couldn't pay, they were pressured to sell their homes to shadowy investors, always at rock-bottom prices. Within weeks, the houses would reappear on the market flipped for massive profit. My neighbor Harold lost $150,000 in equity after Patricia fined him into bankruptcy. Margaret explained bitterly. The following week, her brother listed it for full price. The most startling moment came when 82-year-old Frank Collins shuffled in late, carrying a small recorder. His frail hands trembled as he set it on the table. "I used to sit on the board 3 years ago," he said. "Before my wife got sick, I recorded the executive meetings." Patricia never knew. He pressed play. Patricia's cold voice filled the booth. "I don't care if they can't pay, that's the whole idea. We squeeze until they have no choice but to sell to Greg's company. Then everyone gets their share. The old, the poor, they just drag down property values anyway." A chilling silence followed. Cross-checking Frank's recordings with the documents, a clear pattern emerged. Huge sums had been funneled into maintenance companies, all of which were empty shells tracing back to Greg Sullivan. Even worse, Patricia was preparing to sell off the neighborhood's heart at the playground, the small lake, and other shared space as to her brother's development firm. The deal would line their pockets with millions while gutting the community's charm and destroying property values. As we pieced things together, another truth surfaced. Not every board member was a willing accomplice. Some, like Megan Taylor, were being blackmailed into silence over their own misdeeds. Emily met my eyes over the mountain of evidence spread across the diner table. "We've got 2 choices," I said quietly. "Cut our losses, sell the house, and walk away. Or," Emily interrupted, her voice steely, "we take them down." Not just for USA, for everyone they've crushed. There was never really a decision to make. We were both soldiers, in different ways. Soldiers don't abandon those who can't defend themselves. "This isn't about protecting our home anymore," Emily said. "This is about justice." Patricia Sullivan had no idea what she'd set in motion. She thought she was tormenting a beaten-down homeowner. Instead, she'd provoked a battle-tested strategist with nothing left to lose and a daughter trained in special operations. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The following 3 weeks became a meticulous operation. Emily applied her counterterrorism training to the suburbs, discreetly placing legal recording devices in public areas of the community center. Each night, she retrieved them, carefully analyzing hours of conversations and building a complete picture of Patricia's network. Meanwhile, I coordinated with my IRS contact, identifying the exact financial crimes and evidence required for prosecution. We moved cautiously, methodically, using the same patience that had kept us alive in far more dangerous places than a suburban HOA war. Our first major breakthrough came when Emily, under her legal rights as a resident, reviewed HOA records in the community center office. While the manager, Amanda Pierce, was distracted by a phone call, Emily's friend quietly photographed financial statements, meeting minutes, and incriminating correspondence. Days later, Amanda approached us privately. She admitted she'd known about the corruption but had stayed silent out of fear of losing her job. With our promise of protection, she agreed to become our insider, tipping us off about Patricia's next moves. Through Amanda, we learned Patricia was rushing to finalize the sale of the community's common areas to her brother's company, Silver Ridge Enterprises. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following weekend. The agenda was carefully written in vague language about optimizing assets and future enhancement strategies, but the real plan was clear: sign away the neighborhood before anyone could mobilize. We couldn't stop it with brute force, yet Patricia's grip on the board was too strong. We needed a precise strike. Emily set up a hidden camera in the meeting room illegally placed in the public space. At the same time, we coordinated with James, ensuring a local newspaper reporter and photographer would be present, officially covering a human interest piece. Patricia thought she was about to score her biggest victory. Instead, she was walking straight into a trap. Samantha Reynolds, a former teammate of Emily's and now an agent with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, was fully briefed on the situation. She agreed to keep a team on standby, ready to act when the time was right. Every piece of the plan was finally in place for Patricia's downfall. When the night of the board meeting arrived, Emily and I slipped quietly into seats at the back of the room. Most of the residents ignored us, conditioned by years of intimidation to avoid any association. Patricia, standing tall at the podium, wore her usual mask of confidence as she moved briskly through the agenda, oblivious to the fact that every word was being documented from multiple angles. When she reached the item about the property sale, her language grew deliberately vague. She spoke of unlocking asset potential rather than openly admitting that she was preparing to sell off the neighborhood's most cherished space as if the park, the lake, and even the community center. The board members, either complicit or too frightened to resist, nodded along. After her carefully crafted speech, Patricia called for a vote. That's when I rose to my feet. Before we proceed, I said clearly, could you explain exactly which properties are included in this so-called optimization plan and what, specifically, the community will gain in return? Patricia's smile faltered, though she tried to recover. Mr. Miller, as I've explained, this is a complex financial arrangement that will benefit everyone in the long run. Full details are available in the community office during normal business hours. But we're voting tonight, I pressed. Shouldn't residents know that you're selling the park, the lake, and the community center to Silver Ridge Enterprises for commercial development? A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Patricia's face flushed with anger. That's a complete misrepresentation, she snapped. Emily stood up beside me. Is it? Because we have copies of the agreement right here. She began passing out documents of photographic evidence of the sale contract Patricia had tried to bury. Gasps of shock and outrage spread through the residents as they read. This meeting is adjourned, Patricia barked, motioning to the security guards. But the replacement guard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with so many witnesses present. Patricia tried to pivot. What you're looking at is nothing more than a draft proposal. And frankly, the financial complexities of HOA governance are beyond what most residents can grasp. That's why you elected a board to make these decisions. Her words only deepened the unease in the room. Then Greg Sullivan made the fatal error. Frustrated, he rose and snapped, just take the vote. These people are too ignorant to understand real estate anyway. We're doing them a favor by managing their assets. The room went deathly quiet at his open contempt. And then the doors opened. FBI agents strode in, followed by local journalists whose cameras burst into flashes, filling the hall with a staccato of light. Agent Reynolds approached the podium where Patricia stood frozen. Patricia Sullivan, we have a warrant to seize all HOA financial records and communications related to the proposed property sale. Flash after flash captured the moment her confident mask collapsed. Her face drained from furious red to ghostly pale as she clutched the podium, struggling to keep her composure. This is outrageous. You have no jurisdiction here, she sputtered, her voice cracking. The authority gone. Agents fanned out, gathering boxes of documents and seizing computers. All around us, residents who had been cowed into silence for years began stepping forward, offering their own stories of extortion and fraud. Walter Thompson walked tall, handing over his folder of meticulously prepared evidence. The empire of fear Patricia had built for so long was unraveling right in front of her. As agents escorted her out to detained but not yet under arrest as she locked eyes with me. This isn't over, Miller, she hissed. You don't know who you are dealing with. I allowed myself the faintest smile. Actually, Patricia Brokenbar, you're the one who never knew who you were dealing with. For a fleeting moment, it felt like victory. But deep down, I knew better. A predator corner doesn't surrender, it becomes more dangerous. The fallout was immediate. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page, complete with photographs of Patricia's humiliation as agents carried out evidence. Neighbors who had once avoided us now came to our door, sharing their stories and apologizing for believing her lies. For a brief time, it seemed as though justice would come swiftly, but we underestimated Patricia Sullivan. She had spent years weaving a web of influence, and she wasn't about to go down quietly. Within just 48 hours, she was back on the street, a released pending investigation. Patricia's attorney, Robert Wilson, wasted no time holding a press conference on the steps of City Hall. He painted her as a victim of malicious gossip, as someone targeted by bitter residents carrying personal grudges. Through slick maneuvering and backroom influence, Patricia managed to get herself temporarily reinstated as HOA president, despite the ongoing investigation. Meanwhile, Greg Sullivan leaned on his political connections, applying pressure on the local FBI field office. The result was devastating, as the case was quietly downgraded in priority. At the same time, my former employer refused to review my wrongful termination, citing the ongoing neighborhood controversy as a liability issue. Financially, we were being crushed. With no income, mounting legal bills, and sudden urgent maintenance fees imposed by the HOA, our savings were draining fast. Even Emily wasn't spared. Potential employers began receiving anonymous calls casting doubt on her stability and her background. The attacks were calculated and all-encompassing, designed to force us into surrender or drive us out altogether. Patricia had made it abundantly clear she would rather destroy our lives than face accountability. Things escalated further when Emily received a chilling phone call from an unlisted number. "We know what really happened in Afghanistan," a man's voice said before abruptly hanging up. That evening, I found Emily alone on the back porch. She was staring into the distance, a half-finished mug of coffee trembling slightly in her hands. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking, "there's something I never told you about Afghanistan." Tears welled in her eyes, the first I had seen since her return home. "There was a broken barn incident," she began. As she spoke, I finally understood the unbearable weight she had carried in silence. During her final deployment, her unit was sent on an operation built on faulty intelligence. They expected insurgency but instead found civilians. In the chaos that followed, innocents were caught in the crossfire. Emily, refusing to abandon them, disobeyed orders to retreat and risked her life pulling a family to safety. Though the official report glossed over the intelligence failure, Emily had been decorated for bravery, but that didn't erase the guilt of the civilian injuries she could never forget. "They're threatening to twist the truth," she said softly. "They want to make it look like I was responsible for the casualties, instead of the one who tried to save lives." I reached across the table and held her hand, anger burning inside me. To exploit her trauma for leverage was beyond cruel. "We'll get through this," I promised, though deep down I had no clear path forward. What I did know was that Patricia had crossed a line. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. She had made it viciously personal. The very next morning, a local news site published a vague but damaging article questioning the military record of a former soldier now involved in the Elmwood Estates controversy. Though no names were mentioned, everyone knew exactly who it meant. The fragile trust our neighbors had begun to rebuild collapsed overnight. Doors that had opened to us now quietly shut again. Emilia, who had once faced enemy fire without flinching, seemed to shrink into herself, crushed beneath the collision of her past and present. Watching my daughter suffer broke something inside me. I began to wonder if, by urging her to fight, I had dragged her into a battle that would only deepen her wounds. Then Claire Miller, my eldest daughter and Emily's sister, arrived from New York. As a corporate attorney, Claire brought not only sharp legal insight but also a fresh strategy. "You're doing this all wrong," she said after reviewing everything. "You're playing defensive, reacting to each blow. It's time to flip the script and take control of the narrative." Her first breakthrough came quickly. She discovered that Patricia's attorney, Robert Wilson, wasn't even licensed to practice law in our state, a detail that could prove devastating. Momentum began to shift again when Maria Rodriguez, a local reporter who had been tracking the saga, published a deeply researched expose tilde copyright. Her article revealed Patricia's broader web of HOA abuses across the state, including testimony from residents in 5 separate communities. The story spread like wildfire, picked up by larger media outlets and sparking pressure on officials who had long looked away. Soon, other HOA residents reached out to us, sharing their own stories of intimidation and fraud. What began as our isolated struggle was quickly transforming into a wider movement. We were no longer standing alone. But just as the tide seemed to turn in our favor, Patricia played what she believed was her trump card. At a hastily called press conference, she announced that she would soon release definitive proof. Patricia's camp struck back with a shocking claim. They announced she would soon release proof of misconduct by Emily during her military service. evidence she claimed would expose the true character of those challenging her reputation. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning. As we watched the announcement on the evening news, Emily's face turned pale. "They're really going to do it," she whispered. "They're going to take the worst day of my life and twist it to cover up their corruption." I had never felt so powerless as a father. But sometimes, when everything seems lost, unexpected allies appear. That night, the doorbell rang. On our porch stood Captain James Wilson, Emily's former commanding officer, and beside him a man I didn't recognize. He introduced himself as Amir Kazemi, a former interpreter who had worked alongside Emily's unit in Afghanistan. They had seen the news coverage and knew immediately what Patricia was trying to do. "I won't let them smear your name with lies," Captain Wilson told Emily firmly. It's time the truth came out. For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark of hope return to my daughter's eyes. The morning of Patricia's highly anticipated press conference arrived like a storm front. Two opposing stories were about to collide in public, with Emily's reputation hanging in the balance. Captain Wilson, Amir, and Emily prepared statements of their own, ready to confront whatever distortion Patricia planned to unleash. Claire had arranged sympathetic media coverage to ensure Emily's side would not be silenced. On the drive to the Civic Center, Emily was quiet. I glanced at her. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, calm but resolute. "Dad, running from bullies never works. You're the one who taught me that." My throat tightened. No parent wants to see their child relive pain, but I couldn't have been prouder of her courage. The Civic Center parking lot was overflowing with news vans and curious onlookers. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, expecting fireworks. We slipped into seats near the back and waited for Patricia's dramatic entrance. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as reporters checked their phones nervously. Finally, Robert Wilson appeared on stage, alone, looking rattled. "Ms. Sullivan has been a broken bar, unavoidably detained," he stammered. "The press conference is postponed indefinitely." Questions exploded from the journalists, but Wilson retreated quickly, offering nothing more. As confusion spread through the room, Emily's phone rang. It was Agent Reynolds. "You'll want to turn on Channel 4, she said cryptically. We rushed to a nearby cafe. Copyright, huddling around a television with several reporters. The breaking news banner cut across the screen: HOA president detained by federal authorities. The footage showed Patricia Sullivan at the international airport, flanked by men in dark suits. The camera zoomed in, and the insignia on their jackets drew audible gasps. These weren't FBI agents, they were from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Rapid footsteps echoed in the terminal as Patricia turned. Clutching her suitcase, one of the agents displayed his badge, the metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Internal Revenue Service, Miss Patricia Sullivan, you're under arrest." His voice carried the finality of a gavel strike. Patricia nearly collapsed, not from surprise but from the devastating realization that her empire had crumbled in an instant. Her eyes were vacant, as though the world she built had just been ripped away. The broadcast explained she was being charged with tax evasion, accused of failing to report more than $2 million siphoned from HOA funds over the past 6 years. The federal prosecutor interviewed afterward made it clear, tax evasion carried far harsher penalties than fraud. Patricia was now facing up to 20 years in federal prison. I felt Emily grip my arm tightly as we both processed the shock. This wasn't the FBI's work. It wasn't even connected to the recent wave of evidence we'd uncovered. It was something else entirely. Later that evening, back at home, I finally confessed to Emily. "Remember my old army buddy at the IRS? I sent him all our financial documents 6 months ago, back when we first started getting those absurd violation letters." Emily's eyes widened. 6 months ago? Before Ryan even pulled a gun on you? Before all of this escalated? I nodded. "From the start, I had a gut feeling that something about the HOA's finances didn't add up, so I made sure to hedge my bets." For the first time in weeks, Emily's face lit up with a real smile. "Dad, you sneaky old soldier," she said. I chuckled. "In the military, we were taught never to rely on a single plan of attack. The most effective strategy is always the one your opponent doesn't expect." While Patricia had been busy trying to intimidate us, deflecting the FBI, and dragging Emily's name through the mud, The IRS had been quietly building a tax evasion case against her, and unlike the complicated fraud charges, this case was airtight and carried far harsher penalties. The very financial records we had gathered for the FBI turned out to be critical evidence for the IRS. The weeks that followed transformed Elmwood Estates. Greg Sullivan was caught trying to flee the Cointreau, arrested and charged with conspiracy and bribery. Robert Wilson was stripped of his law license for practicing without proper credentials. The HOA board was dissolved and rebuilt through a democratic election. Walter Thompson, once a quiet neighbor, was now elected president, standing tall with a newfound confidence. His first order of business, eliminating Patricia's petty rules and slashing HOA fees down to only what was truly necessary. Even my old employer called, admitting they'd been misled by Greg's influence. They offered me a higher position as a gesture of apology. Emily chose to remain in the community and opened her own self-defense training center, with special classes for seniors and women, many of whom had lived in fear under Patricia's regime. Her center quickly grew into a safe gathering place, mending the divisions Patricia had created. The park and community spaces Patricia had once tried to sell were saved, their improvements funded by the money recovered from the HOA's misused funds. 6 months later, Emily and I sat on our porch swing, sipping lemonade while children played freely in the street, a sight once forbidden under Patricia's suffocating rules. "You know, Dad," Emily said thoughtfully, "this fight was, in some ways, more dangerous than my deployment overseas." I raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "In combat, at least you know who the enemy is," she replied. "Here, they hid behind respectability, using rules as weapons against us." I nodded, understanding. "But Patricia never grasped one thing," I said. Emily tilted her head. "What's that, Dad?" I smiled, watching the golden light of sunset spill across the neighborhood. "When you threaten the daughter of an old soldier and that daughter happens to be a Delta Force operator, you're not just making a mistake. You're signing the death warrant for your own power and reputation." Emily burst out laughing, a sound I had longed to hear again during those dark days. Through the window, the television flashed a headline: Patricia Sullivan sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for tax evasion and fraud. Outside, neighbors who once avoided us now waved warmly as they passed. Children laughed and ran across lawns no longer measured by rulers. Walter dropped by to discuss plans for a community garden that would replace Patricia's gaudy HOA signage. At last, our home was what I had hoped for when I first signed the mortgage, not perfect, but ours, in a neighborhood where people looked out for each other instead of policing one another's lives. "We didn't just win our house back," Emily said softly. "We freed an entire community." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, overflowing with pride for the woman she had become. "That's what real soldiers do," I replied. "We protect those who can't protect themselves." In the end, Patricia's reign of fear collapsed, not through intimidation or violence, her favorite tools, but by something far stronger: the quiet bravery of ordinary people standing together for what was right. And perhaps, by one old soldier who remembered that the best battle plan is always the one your enemy never sees coming.